Thanks, Samantha, and thank you everybody for joining us. As Samantha mentioned, I'm the manager of client engagement at Peters and Associates. I'm responsible for all of our managed services offerings. The topic of today's webinar is securing Office 365. I've got an eye on the question pane, and Samantha will interrupt me throughout if there are questions. So I encourage you to ask, and I'm happy to answer. Today's webinar is part of a series. So if you happen to miss some of our previous webinars, on July 8th, we covered patch management, the 22nd, endpoint protection, and then earlier this month, backup and recovery. We've recorded all of these. They're all posted to our website. Samantha can drop a link to where those are on our blog, and we've written up some recap information on those as well. If you have any interest in the upcoming webinars as part of this series, on the 2nd of September, we're going to discuss security awareness training, and then we'll close out this series on the 9th with talking about advanced security monitoring. But let's move into today's topic. So a quick look at the agenda. We're going to talk about some of the challenges of email security. We'll talk through how we detect suspicious activity in Office 365, some of the things that you want to think about looking for. And then lastly, I'll cover our managed service around Office 365 and what we're doing for our customers. So I want to talk with speaking about the cloud and specifically about shared responsibility. And I'll explain what that means in just a moment. But from a statistical perspective, 90% of organizations are now using at least one cloud service. That's according to Flexera's 2020 State of the Cloud report. Probably not surprising for most of you, the vast majority of our customers have at the very least moved email to the cloud as kind of a first step for dipping their toe in. So a lot of customers are already in the cloud, more and more are moving there each day as well. One of the other things that was highlighted from this study is 81% of these organizations also rate cloud security as the biggest challenge. We'll talk about, again, when we get to the shared responsibility, when we move things to the cloud, a lot of responsibility for maintaining servers and general management shifts to Microsoft. And to some people, it kind of blurs the line of what do you continue to manage and what are you still responsible for from a security perspective. So cloud security is a huge concern for a lot of organizations and understanding their role in that. And then the last couple of things I want to highlight here. So this State of the Cloud report was run early in the year, and they kind of into March as COVID started to impact organizations, they did start asking a subset of respondents questions about how cloud usage has changed during COVID. And if we focus really on the SMB number, which is probably what we care about more than the other numbers for most of you, 50% of organizations have now shifted their thinking of the cloud and how much they're using it because of COVID. Obviously, a lot of remote work, a lot of video calls of other resources are moving there. It might be a better central place to run applications and store data and all of that stuff. So for a lot of organizations, it accelerated their shift to the cloud and moving things there. The last piece I'll highlight on this slide is the shared responsibility model. And I know it's a little bit small on your screens. We have a link to the source page for this. This is Microsoft's table there. So we'll drop a link. At the very least, it's going to be in our recap blog. Samantha, if you've got a moment, you can grab the link that goes to Microsoft's shared responsibility page. But if you've worked with us recently on any managed services initiative, you've probably seen something similar. We talk a lot about shared responsibility when we are talking about Peters and Associates assisting with management of different parts of your environment, making sure everybody knows their role. But if we focus on Microsoft's view of shared responsibility, it's very similar concept. And if we focus really where Office 365 sits, it's on that far left side where you see SaaS management. So What is a cloud provider doing for you? Well, they've got the physical data center, so Microsoft's handling security at that level. They own the physical network. They own all the physical hosts. Microsoft is responsible for all of that stuff. Staying in the SaaS model, of course, Microsoft is handling the operating system underneath Office 365. So things like patching, things like configuration, all happening at Microsoft's level. Same with network controls. Same with controls over the actual applications, so Exchange and SharePoint and Teams, all of that, the backend components there, all in Microsoft's court to control. Now, if we look at the top 4 items, that's where our organizations take on responsibility. Identity and directory infrastructure. So most of you are probably maintaining Active Directory with Azure AD Sync to send your identities out to the cloud. You're fully responsible for managing your AD infrastructure. Microsoft takes on some responsibility in terms of hosting the Azure AD side of things, but you own those identities. And that's really in that next level up is accounts and identities. So you're responsible for securing those identities, your users' usernames and credentials, and configuring multi-factor authentication. That's in our court to be responsible for. Devices, of course, your PCs, your mobile devices that are connecting in. That's something that's a responsibility of us as customers of Office 365 to maintain it and secure ourselves. And then lastly, of course, information and data. So the mailboxes themselves, the SharePoint libraries, all the information is ours to secure. And there's also levels in here of configuration for the tenant as a whole, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment as well. But the point is, understand that even though we've shifted mail and a lot of responsibility off to Microsoft, there's still quite a bit of things that we need to do, and our thinking around how we're securing mail changes, because we don't own that perimeter anymore, right? That perimeter is not behind our firewall, it's now out in Microsoft's cloud, and really need to think about how we're securing these things. I also want to talk about some of the challenges as it directly relates to mail. So this probably isn't surprising to a lot of you who are responsible for your email security or at least administration. 92.4% of malware is delivered via email. This is from Verizon's 2018 Data Breach Investigations report that found that, yes, the vast majority of malware is coming in via email. But the other finding, and this is from an organization called Siren, they did some testing over a few months and found that 10.5% of spam, phishing, and malware emails are missed by enterprise email security systems. And the point is that technology has limitations. A lot of you might be using probably Exchange Online's native filtering functions. Maybe you have Azure, or maybe you have Exchange Online Advanced Threat Protection, which does provide some additional layers of filtering. Maybe use a third party like a Barracuda or a Mimecast to provide additional layers of filtering. Those are good systems. They can help to weed out some of these things, but it's not going to be 100%. The attackers are getting better at constructing emails to carry these payloads. It's not as easy as spotting, a poor grammar or even the attachments are getting smarter. So there are limitations to what technology can do. And we're going to talk about security awareness training in a couple weeks as well, which also plays a role in this. So if the technology side of things is missing things, we need our users to also know what they're looking for, but we also know that even users who are trained in security awareness training can fail to recognize a malicious email from time to time. So I also want to bring up real quickly the table that we looked at last week. This is the NIST cybersecurity framework. I'm not going to go in depth on it here, but I really want to call it out specifically because of what we just talked about. Basically, we've said, while protection does filter out a lot of things, it is not complete. There are limitations to what we can filter out with technology, and our users, while we are going to train them in security awareness training, that's also not a fail-safe. Users can still fail a phishing test. They can still fail when it comes to an actual malicious email as well. And that really raises the importance of this detection piece. We talk a lot about dwell time, and dwell time statistics are all over the place. There's really scary numbers about, attackers being in systems for, over a year, almost 2 years in some types of attacks, where you don't know that you've had it that's compromised, and they're just in there gathering data, or getting passwords, whatever else they might be doing. When we look specifically at email type attacks, the dwell time tends to be shorter as well. We look at them getting in, completing, say, a business email compromise, exploiting, and getting out. And so we have a smaller window of time to detect that there is suspicious activity going on and remove that attacker from the environment. And so we're going to talk now then about what types of activities and these indicators of compromise we can look for in a service like Office 365, where again, Microsoft holds a lot of this stuff within their data center. Maybe some of the traditional tools that we might have used when this was on premises aren't exactly available to us. First, I want to take a look at what these attacks actually look like, and that's going to give us some hints as to what our detection techniques might be. And so there's a couple different attacks that we can talk about. I think the most prominent one is going to be the malware and the ransomware, which you talked about a little bit, and a user identifying an email, and if they click on something they shouldn't click on, and that downloading a piece of malware. The other side of things is business email compromise, in which somebody is impersonated, or it's also called mailbox or account takeover, in order to get a victim to send money to the wrong place. That's typically how we see it. And I think if we look at how these typically happen and what the attackers are after and how they conduct themselves, that's going to tell us what we need to look for from a detection standpoint. So any business email compromise starts here, where the inbox is compromised. It doesn't matter how necessarily for this scenario. User could have given up credentials. Maybe the user used the same credentials from a previous hack. Either way, that mailbox is compromised. Now what the attacker's doing is watching, reading, and learning. They're sitting there for those 20 days or whatever the average is for dwell time for a user to, for an attacker to be in that environment. They are learning your role in the organization. They're learning who you communicate with, both internally but also externally. And that's really what they care about, is they want to get somebody who's, say, on the accounts receivable side, who's sending out billing to clients. And they're learning how these people communicate, how their kind of language pattern, and because ultimately they're going to impersonate here, and they need to be able to sell that they are in fact this person that they're impersonating. So they're looking and seeing what billing cycles are to learn when they're going to jump in. And then this next stage here is impersonate. So we've seen this play out a few different times in the kind of outside of the business world. We've seen instances where you're getting close to a real estate closing. You're on the day of, and you're getting that email from the attorney that says, hey, here's where you need to wire money to. And immediately after that, you get another email ostensibly from the attorney that says, oh wait, here's the actual wiring address. I made a mistake. And if you wire the money to that address, well, the bank's not getting it, and you may have compromised your closing, all because that mailbox was compromised and somebody impersonated just at the right time. We've seen this also in business where we're more focused, where somebody is watching that inbox, they're learning when the billing cycle is, and they're either sending out a fake invoice, or they'll wait until a real invoice goes out, and they'll kind of piggyback off that message and say, oh, sorry, client, actually, we changed banks. This is new information you should use. And that creates a lot of problems, right? You don't necessarily find out that there's an issue until it's 10 days later, and you're trying to figure out why this client hasn't paid. You're calling them, and they're saying, well, they already paid. There's egg on your face. There's a reputation issue. You're probably eating a lot of that loss for the client. And so this is how these impersonation attacks tend to go. And what we see a lot of the times is this inbox compromise that happened. The first time we learn about it is, unfortunately for too many organizations, is when that impersonation happens and when we're on the phone with our client and realizing that there is actually a problem. And so that's why these detection that's why detection is so important to this, is figuring it out before it becomes an issue for you and for your clients. And then the last step is that attackers are always covering their tracks, using folders that you wouldn't normally use for email messages, or deleting any responses, creating rules within Outlook that are going to divert any responses to your messages to a different folder so that the victim isn't aware of it. And so it's in these areas and how a attacker is behaving that we're going to look for our solutions for detecting malicious activity. Real quickly, at kind of a high level, and this is maybe less from an ongoing detection standpoint and more from a get it right when you set it up perspective, and then that becomes another thing that you're going to look for in detecting is, has this changed from how we normally would have it? So one of those things is disabling legacy protocols. So POP, IMAP, if you haven't done so already, Microsoft is actually going to be sunsetting these in 2021. So hopefully you don't have too much usage of it, but if you don't have a need for POP or IMAP, certainly on all your accounts you shouldn't, but maybe you have 1 or 2 accounts that you need to be moving off. But the point is, don't allow these legacy protocols. So make sure it's disabled in your mailbox profile, that when you create new mailboxes, you're not continuing to leave yourself open. Audit and retain everything. So this is a huge problem when it comes to Office 365 and Microsoft releasing new features. So as we know, if you've been in Office 365 for a while, Microsoft regularly provides new features. They don't always release these features with security in mind. Sometimes their default settings aren't exactly what we would recommend. And one of the big things is the auditing side of things. So it's our philosophy that you audit every mailbox as much as you possibly can, and you retain that data as long as you possibly can. There might be some legal or compliance concerns for some organizations, so take it on an organization by organization basis. But if you're not subject to those types of things, absolutely audit and retain everything, because that's your key to learning if you've been breached and learning the scope of that breach, learning when it first happened, and really keep an eye on setting it right now, and then as Microsoft introduces features, making sure you're reviewing those settings too. Implement and monitor MFA. So multi-factor authentication we've been talking about for a while, but provides that extra level of security in the event that user credentials are compromised. And so make sure it's set up right, and then make sure you're flagging things that are unauthenticated attempts where MFA was either rejected, or one of the things that we do in our organization too is looking at, Active Directory knows what my cell phone number is. If my MFA is a cell phone number and it's not the cell phone number that's in Active Directory, well, who set up that MFA, and was it actually somebody who shouldn't be allowed access to the organization? So one more thing to think about. Delete old user mailboxes. So one of the things we flag for is mailboxes that haven't been accessed in 30x number of days, right? So make sure that you have an offboarding process, and make sure you're double checking that these things are deleted, accounts are removed, because any account is a vector to the organization. And then lastly, from a configuration standpoint, disabling remote PowerShell access. There's no reason that any user really should have that beyond your administrative users, and then you should be looking at separating your admin users from the typical mailbox, so that phishing attacks and things like that are not going to compromise a administrator level account. So all of those things should be configured from the outset and should be reviewed regularly. What about ongoing indicators of compromise in Office 365? The biggest one and the surest way to tell if you have been compromised tends to be these foreign mailbox logins. If I've got a login coming from China, I have a login coming from Nigeria, that's probably not me. Every user in Office 365 is home to a country. For most of you, if you only operate within the US, they're all going to be home to the US. Even if you have folks that are working in Canada or maybe some European countries, they can be home to that location. And when I log in from an IP address that's outside of there, that's something that needs to be flagged. Mailbox forwarding. So one of the things that attackers tend to do to help get around some of the foreign mailbox login flags is access the mailbox once and then set up a forwarding rule to send to a Gmail or a Yahoo email account. And that way, they're not risking triggering one of those foreign mailbox login things by logging into the mailbox regularly. They can exfiltrate data, they can learn and watch from there, and then when they are ready to impersonate that user, they can log in again. And so keep an eye on those types of rules. Attackers are pretty clever with it too, where they might go and create a gassensmith@gmail.com. So to the unsuspecting person, it looks like that's a personal mail forwarding rule that I've set up. But it's not. It could be an attacker, and that gets into organizational policy about sending email to personal mailboxes anyway. RSS feed folder. So this is something that we have kind of seen in the wild, and we developed kind of tools around picking up this piece of things. But the RSS feed folder, every Exchange mailbox has one. It shouldn't be storing mail. It's used programmatically by Exchange when you subscribe to a newsletter or something of that effect, but it does not store mail by default in the way that Exchange uses it. What we've seen before is attackers divert mail that they don't want their victims to see to this folder so that they have their own stash of messages that they're sending and communicating with other victims in this folder. And so that's one of the things that we look at is their mail being stored in that RSS feed folder. Auditing bypass. Generally, you shouldn't have any accounts that are bypassing auditing. We've seen it in some cases with, for instance, if you're backing up Office 365, that does generate a lot of auditing logs. So you might have some accounts where you treat them differently. They might bypass auditing, but you're also doing more manual checks on those. But generally, like I said, our philosophy is audit and retain that as much information as you can. If an account is set to bypass auditing, it's a risk, and it's possibly something that was set by an attacker. And then lastly, admin audit log. So actions taken by admins could also be a clue to something that looks suspicious. Is that something that your admins actually did? Especially, we recommend having a short list of admins, not having a lot, and segmenting responsibilities. But that's something to keep an eye on. So those are some of the things that we look at on a regular basis. From our services perspective, a few things that I just want to highlight that we do, and we do these on our side, we do these for customers as well. So daily notification of foreign mailbox logins, like I said, this is the highest correlated detection method that we have right now for a compromised mailbox. So looking at that on a daily basis. On a weekly basis, we're looking at other things like that RSS feed folder, mailbox forwarding rules, multi-factor authentication settings, your advanced threat protection settings, and reviewing these. It's about 20 other indicators of compromise in Office 365 that we look at on a weekly basis and try to determine if there's anything fishy going on, that maybe it's not a foreign mailbox login, maybe it's somebody on US soil that we are trying to identify suspicious activity for. We also do an annual deep tenant review by an Office 365 engineer. So in this tool, we've scripted a whole bunch of stuff that we're looking at, but we can't possibly script everything yet. And so we have an engineer look at things compared to like a Microsoft Secure Score, other things like your multi-factor authentication configuration, all things that we look at in that deeper tenant review. And then lastly, things that are separate from Office 365, but still important from a security perspective. the daily critical port scans, right now we're looking at RDP ports, but we'll be adding other ports in the future. But what this is really looking at is, do you have any open RDP ports that are facing the outside world that are unsecured? And the reason we look at this is something like 82% of ransomware attacks are initiated through an open RDP port. Whether that RDP port is left open out of negligence, or it's an attacker that was able to gain access to the environment and they went and opened an RDP port to deliver that ransomware payload. The point is, over 80% of those successful attacks are initiated through that port. So we scan every day to make sure and flag if an RDP port is left open on an unsecured device. And then we also, on a quarterly basis, are looking at external vulnerability across any external facing IP address and making sure we're catching those things and correcting configurations or patching a device and that type of stuff. And then from a pricing perspective, and I'll give the caveat I've given on all of these webinars, it depends on your mailbox count and some of the specifics around this, but tends to start around $400 per month. And what's next, and I'll open it up fully to questions here in a moment. I have not seen any come across in the queue just yet. We have a free trial of this service. So I've talked a lot about what it can do, and a lot of things probably sound kind of pie in the sky right now without seeing it in action. So if you haven't done it before, sign up for a free trial. We tend to catch, I would say, every week we catch 1 or 2 foreign mailbox logins. It's something that we see quite a bit. So I would be safe in assuming that we'd probably catch something in a free trial run of that. So reach out to us. We're happy to engage there. Schedule a one-on-one call with your Peters & Associates account manager. We are doing a promotion as part of this series. We'll give you a $25 gift card if we can set up a meeting to talk at a deeper level about any of the services we've talked about. So you have questions about patching or endpoint protection, or this service that we've talked about today. Reach out to your account manager, reach out to myself. If you don't know how to reach out, you can always hit info@peters.com as well. And then lastly, join us on September 2nd. That's our next webinar in the series. We're going to talk about security awareness training. And that's all I have from a perspective of prepared slides. So if you have questions, please type them into the question panel there. We've got a little bit of time for me to answer. Okay, I have not seen anything come through just yet, which is fine. I'll give it another minute here, but if you don't have any questions, please feel free to jump off. Just thank you for joining us. Again, if you want to contact us, you can hit info@peters.com, give us a call, or we can chat over virtual coffee these days. But feel free to reach out, and we're happy to have a conversation about this or anything else you have questions on. Okay, I don't see any questions in the queue. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and close things out. So once again, thank you all for joining us. We hope that this was informative for you. Please join us in a couple of weeks for our next session. And again, reach out if you've got questions on anything. Thanks very much.